Gentlemen, Mr. Henry N. Baumann, Senior Research Engineer of the Carborundum Company, Niagara Falls, New York.
Soon after the discovery of the company, using the proceeds from the sale of the first few ounces of his new abrasive material, bought a microscope to study, as he afterwards wrote, the structure of my new material. That was the beginning of research in manufactured hard materials. Since then, microscopes of every kind have been used and continue to be used in the study of grinding materials. But none of these conventional microscopes could be used directly for high-temperature microscopy. A need was felt for a radically different instrument that would permit the close observation of reactions taking place at extremely high temperatures. The instrument that we developed and the results that we obtained during a period of 15 years are shown and described now.
Here is a modern polarizing microscope, a most efficient instrument for examining crystalline phases in chemistry, mineralogy, and ceramics. See how close the lower lens of the microscope must be placed to the object of study. About 1/4 of an inch for this commonly used 16mm microscope objective lens. But Carborundum Company research engineers, anxious to watch high-temperature reactions actually take place, developed this new kind of microscope. The auxiliary lens, highly corrected for aberration, is the heart of the instrument. It was especially designed for this purpose by the scientific division of the American Optical Company. It picks up light from the furnace and projects it as a real image to a point ordinarily occupied by the stage of a conventional microscope. Henceforth, well-defined real images are treated microscopically as if they were the original object and may be observed directly or photographed in motion. Instead of a fraction of an inch, our furnace is now over 8 inches from our nearest optical unit. To look down into our furnace to observe an experiment, we place a highly polished stainless metal mirror in front of our auxiliary lens. Here is the high-temperature microscope arranged for our first experiment. Tennis balls have been placed at each corner to dampen vibration. Note the housings which contain the auxiliary lens and the vertical mirror. Here is an ordinary microscope. On it is an additional eyepiece for simultaneous observation with motion picture camera ready for action. In this small furnace, heated by glow bar silicon carbide elements, we now make our first experiments. On this plaque, we place some powder. Now we begin the experiment. The furnace for clear photography. A fan is started to eliminate distortion caused by heat waves. Current for heat is turned on. As the camera begins to operate, the furnace temperature rises rapidly. Now looking down into the furnace, we see the surface of molten glass in which titanium oxide has been completely dissolved at a temperature of 2,550 degrees Fahrenheit. As the molten glass cools, crystals of titanium oxide are precipitated, increasing in number and growing in size. The flow of these microcrystals across the field of the microscope is caused by the slight temperature gradient of the glass. Now the titanium oxide crystals have completely precipitated, but these solid crystals are being held in a glassy matrix which is still liquid. Finally, this residual liquid solidifies at a still lower temperature and a second crystalline phase appears. The next experiments are of a practical nature in the manufacture of grinding wheels. We are going to see how the bonds that hold the silicon carbide abrasive grain in such wheels are formed. These bonds are mixtures of clays and fluxes that react to form glass. First, we place abrasive grain on a refractory plaque, and then in the center, we drop a lump of raw bond. You are again looking down into our furnace, into which we have placed our test plaque with silicon carbide grain and bond. You see the lump of bond begin to shrink and fuse as the temperature rises. Our picture was made by time-lapse exposures of the motion picture camera, so you are seeing the bond formation accelerated 12 times the actual time of the experiment. Now the bond is melted to a molten glass. Note how this liquid bond wets and draws the abrasive particles together. There is plenty of activity, but remember, what you see take place in a few minutes actually took an hour to occur. We turn now to the study of electric furnace products used in super refractory service. Into this small platinum boat, the technician places two specimens cut from large glass melting furnace refractory blocks. One is dense crystalline aluminum oxide cut from monofrax fusion cast blocks. The other is from the fire clay type of refractory, also used in glass tanks. The boat is in turn placed in a larger platinum container, and this is filled with glass frit. Again, we have an accelerated motion picture experiment. Note that the glass is completely molten. We're going to hold the temperature steady at 2600 degrees Fahrenheit for over an hour. Observe how the glass penetrates the pores and dissolves the vitrified structure of the fire clay refractory on our left. Very little chemical activity can be seen in the surface of the dense electric furnace fusion cast specimen. Finally, the vitrified product is completely dissolved, and the solid crystalline alumina piece remains almost unchanged. Next, we have a series of experiments at still greater temperatures, temperatures only made possible with electric furnaces. Our high-temperature microscope is being prepared for horizontal observation by removing the housed mirror. Into this opening in a carbon rod, we have placed three skeletal crystals. In the center is mullite, the high-temperature form of aluminum silicate, which melts at 3300 degrees Fahrenheit. On the left is aluminum oxide, which melts at about 3700 degrees. And on the right is silicon carbide, which remains unchanged to over 4000 degrees Fahrenheit. With the miniature carbon rod test furnace in place for horizontal observation, the power is turned on. First, the mullite needle in the center, and then the alumina at the left melt in their proper order. The silicon carbide still stands, though we reach a temperature of over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we are photographing our experiments at normal speed, so we observe them at their true elapsed time rate. Now we are going to make an experiment in which aluminum oxide is melted, vaporized, and recrystallized. In the groove of this carbon microfurnace, we place aluminum oxide powder. On top, we place a flat carbon cover, and now again our line of view is horizontal. We see the lower part of the furnace grows hotter, while the top remains comparatively colder. We are seeing the action at normal speed. Note the aluminum oxide shrink. See the vapors inside the reaction chamber. And finally, the vapor condensing to form long, needle-like alpha aluminum oxide crystals. We repeat our experiment, a difficult one to control because the melting, vaporizing, and condensing temperatures cover such a short temperature range. For over 50 years, man has wondered what actually takes place within the incandescent heart of one of these huge commercial silicon carbide furnaces. This is the reaction generally given for the formation of silicon carbide. But how rapidly does it occur? What are the intermediate steps? These are the kind of questions that can only be answered by the high-temperature microscope. For a final study, to record the formation of silicon carbide, we employ a microfurnace consisting of a carbon rod with a 1/8 inch diameter hole for a reaction chamber. Into this hole, we put a lump of mix containing fine silica and carbon in the proportion to form silicon carbide. Again, we turn on the arc light and the power. The furnace becomes white hot. We measure temperatures optically. We are photographing this scene with only the light from our white hot test furnace. Now the photomicrographic results show the reaction mix beginning to shrink. You will observe the fusion of silica. Note the fused silica glass bubble. See their attraction for carbon. Now, silicon carbide crystals are forming. Our little furnace, as we have found directly by optical pyrometry, is reaching temperatures up to 4,700 degrees Fahrenheit. We complete our experiments on the formation of silicon carbide by placing small grains of quartz sand in the reaction chamber. Our carbon to form silicon carbide is derived from the furnace itself. Observe the fusion of the quartz. The molten silica is actually boiling and liberating silica vapor. The reaction chamber is apparently empty. Actually, it is filled with gases that now react to form these brilliant microcrystals of silicon carbide. Scenes have merely hinted at the many uses for the high-temperature microscope. Wherever science is exploring phenomena at high temperatures, this development by the Carborundum Company laboratories may be a useful tool.